Wow. Hey, great to be with you guys today. I'm just wondering, I gave him $50. I'm just wondering if I gave him 100, how my introduction would have went. Thank you, Neil, for those kind words. Although, in a moment of vulnerability, I was a little offended. You introduced me this morning as a special speaker. Now, ladies, when you're out shopping, what does the word specially usually mean? It means you've got a marked down speaker here today. Wow, aren't you excited? Well, hey, we're going to dive right into this message, and I'm so excited to be here because I think your church gets the sermon title. Growing the church, one conversation at a time. Have you ever thought about that in terms of how the church grows? One conversation at a time. And if we really were to take another step further, it would be one aha at a time. That Christianity is a revelation that God gives us about himself. And one of the ways that revelation occurs is when we have conversations and someone has an aha moment. So today we're going to talk about how to increase those aha moments so that we can grow the church. I don't know if you've ever seen yourself this way as a church. This is how I see you as I flew into Dallas. That I'm excited to be here today to speak to God's postal workers. I don't know if you've ever seen yourself that way before as God's postman or God's postwoman. That actually the big idea is that you as a church would gather on Sunday, which you're doing right now. You're gathered in your seats so that you could scatter and take this good news to the streets Monday through Saturday. Important announcement this morning. Very, very important. Church is not a place, should not be a place where we just come and get our knowledge about the Bible and we come back the next week and do it again and do it again and do it. We become smarter about the Bible. The whole idea of the church is that this is God's institution that he's created so that we might be equipped as his saints to do the work of the ministry. And so you wonder where I get this idea of God's postal workers. Well, I get it actually from John chapter 20, verse 21. As Jesus spoke these words, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you. Could you stop for a moment and let that rest on you? Have you ever thought of yourself as God's sent one? This is a total ball game changer, folks. When you realize you're a sent one, whether you're the dentist that Neil spoke of, or whether you are a real estate agent, no matter wherever you are, if you would see yourself as God sent one to represent him, to be his ambassador right where you work and live. When you embrace that, it's a ball game changer. We get out of this mindset of I owe, it's off to work I go, which is the way a lot of people see their work. And now all of a sudden, we realize, wow, mission work isn't just crossing a body of salt water, and that's what's considered mission work, that you and I are called to live a missional life. And I love this, Neil. You would probably love this lady. She was 96 years old, and after my workshop that I'm going to do this afternoon, she came up to me, and I was talking to somebody else. I was, can you believe it, having a conversation. And as I was having a conversation and giving someone my full attention, she was standing off to the side, just tugging on my arm vehemently. And I turned around and said, ma'am, just a minute. I'll speak with you as soon as this conversation is over. When I finished the conversation, I did an about face and I said, yes, ma'am, what can I do for you? She says, Doug, do you know where I'm a missionary? I said, no, ma'am, I don't. She goes, anywhere these 2 feet are planted. And I'm thinking, Neil, you'd probably like to bottle that up. I think every pastor would like to bottle that up, that if we could just embrace the idea that we are God's called out ones, and we've been set apart for a purpose, that anywhere our 2 feet are planted, we have opportunities to have conversations about Jesus. And as we do that, the church grows one conversation at a time. Now, I get it. Probably some of you are sitting here and saying, hey, my thing, I'm just not like Neil. He's an extrovert. He seems to like to have these conversations all the time. I get that. Today, here's my absolute promise to you. If you choose to come this afternoon, we're going to talk about how to start conversations in practical, doable, and authentic ways. Not that you have to be somebody that you're not, because I don't think God intended that. God intended for you to just be you in Jesus and allow his Spirit to live in and through you to start those conversations. And if you feel like you've been struggling with that and you feel like, hey, I just can't do what Neil does. In fact, that's why we pay him to do what he does. So in a sense, Neil gets paid to be good and the rest of you get to be good for nothing. But the reality is, the idea of the church is that we would be equipped to actually have these conversations. The Apostle Paul certainly understood this. Look at what he said in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20. He said, so we, the church, have been sent, there's that word again, sent, to speak for Christ. It is like God is calling to people through us. What a privilege, and I'm humbled by this, to think that God would want to use a knucklehead like me to actually represent him. I often tell people, hey, if you knew what went on in my mind 24/7, you certainly would not be sitting here listening to me speak today. But let's flip it. If I knew what went on in your minds 24/7, I probably wouldn't be here speaking to you. The reality is we're all cracked and flawed people, and yet God still wants to use us to be his ambassadors. Now, how many of you have ever attempted to send God's mail and you feel like this is what actually ended up happening? The mail got returned to sender. Anybody feel like that happened to you? You really attempted to deliver God's mail, but it got returned to sender. Well, let me encourage you to pick up a copy of my book. In chapter 2, I talk about 10 reasons why often the mail gets returned to sender. And I can speak about these very authentically because I've committed every one of them in my attempt to deliver God's mail. I call them spiritual conversation killers. This afternoon, we're going to talk about 5 of those and why, if you want to literally close down your opportunities to have conversations, and often we do these things, we're just blind to maybe how we're coming across, that sometimes people truly aren't saying no to Jesus as much as we think they are. Listen, church, they're saying no to the unappetizing ways we are presenting him. And if we want to increase the quantity and the quality of our God conversations, sometimes we just need to get honest and say, the way I'm doing the conversation probably is not helpful. I was in a church last week and I said, have you ever stopped to think about this for a moment? That for a lot of people, they will remember how you did the conversation much more than what you actually said in the conversation. So it's important that we're representing the kingdom well. Now, I mentioned that I believe every one of you are God's postal workers. And if I hung out with you for a week, I could tell you, this is your route. I mean, every one of you here has a route. And you're saying, well, what's my route? Well, your route is where your day-to-day life naturally causes you to cross the path of those who are outside the faith, but inside your reach. So if I hung out with you for a week, it'd be like, hey, where do you work out? Where do you shop? Where do you buy gas? You do these things week in and week out. And I would suggest to you, this is your route, and this is where God wants you to deliver his mail, to get to know the people there and to hear their stories and start having Jesus conversations with them. Everybody has a spiritual address. And I think one of the big ideas today is if we can discern and begin to discover people's spiritual addresses, this is one of the things that's so important in terms of starting conversations. Because here's a thought for you. Everyone is somewhere in proximity to God. And so when we discover someone's spiritual address, we can begin to join the conversation God has already been having with them. We'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. But I want to introduce you to somebody today that maybe you know, maybe you've never heard of. He has a TV show called Penn and Teller, Fool Us. He has an act in Vegas. And let's just say this guy really doesn't like Christians. If you go on YouTube, you will find that he has a great disdain for people like us. However, listen to what he says about this whole idea of you and I having conversations with others about Jesus, because I'm going to be curious as to what you think about it, because it's a real head turner, at least it was for me. Check it out.
I want to talk to you about this. I get home from the show, and at the end of the show, as I've mentioned before, we go out and we talk to folks and, sign an occasional autograph and shake hands and so on. And there was one guy waiting over to the side in the what I call the hover position. And then he said, I brought this for you. And he handed me a Gideon Pocket Edition. It was really wonderful. I believe he knew that I was an atheist, but he was not defensive, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he was truly complimentary. It wasn't in any way, it didn't seem like empty flattery. He was really kind and nice and sane, and looked me in the eyes and talked to me, and then gave me this Bible. And I've always said, that I don't respect people who don't proselytize. I don't respect that at all. If you believe that there's a heaven and hell, and people could be going to hell or not getting eternal life or whatever, and you think that, it's not really worth telling them this because it would make it socially awkward. And atheists who think that people shouldn't proselytize, just leave me alone, keep your religion to yourself. How much do you have to hate somebody to not proselytize? How much do you have to hate somebody to believe that everlasting life is possible and not tell them that? I mean, if I believed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a truck was coming at you and you didn't believe it, that truck was bearing down on you, there's a certain point where I tackle you. And this is more important than that. And I've always thought that, and I've written about that, and I've thought of it conceptually. This guy was a really good guy. He was polite and honest and sane, and he cared enough about me to proselytize and give me a Bible.
What's your takeaway? I know when I first saw this, I'm going, oh my goodness. We just got called out by an atheist. This guy's saying, hey, if you believe what you say you believe, and you're big on the, hey, you've studied the Bible. This is a Bible church. And you supposedly know Jesus and the good news of Jesus. He's saying, how much do you actually have to hate people to not start conversations about Jesus? And I think he has a valid point. I mean, how can you refuse this idea that, if this is good news, and this morning we sang the worship songs, you really want to worship? It doesn't cost you a lot to show up here in the morning and sing a few songs. You know where it costs you something is out there on the edge of the mission field where your route is, and actually starting a conversation and risking possibly the way people perceive you. Oh no, there's one of those kind of people, those Christians. When we ascribe worth to God, which is what the word worship means, we're saying, God, you're worthy of me, if you would, being perceived as a fool for you, because I ultimately want to share this good news with them. And I raised the question, hey, would you be here this morning if somebody hadn't started a conversation with you? I think back to my days at Kent State University, where I did my undergrad, and there was a young guy named Ed who, week after week, met with me over a soft drink. And I was a skeptic, I was a cynic. And over time, Ed answered a lot of my questions, and then he turned me on to Josh McDowell, who later, the last time I was in Dallas, I actually traveled with Josh McDowell as one of his interns. And it was those conversations that Ed had with me that opened me up, that I had some aha moments and caused me to look at it all differently. I don't know that I'd be here today apart from those conversations. So that's why I'm so passionate about increasing the quantity and quality of our God conversations, because I know that's how God grows his church, one conversation at a time. Now, Neil has given me, this is going to shock some of you, especially those of you who are already on staff here. But because he's so passionate about this subject, and so much so that you guys have this big idea that in the next few years, you're going to have thousands of conversations about Jesus. He's so committed to this that he's actually allowed me to introduce a new staff member. And you've yet to meet him, but because he's from our ministry, Athletes in Action, and I'm an Athletes in Action guy, that's my background, I get to introduce him to you today, and he will be coming here soon. Check him out.
Why did I want to be the evangelism linebacker? Well, let me put it to you like this. As a fish was created to swim in water, as a bird was created to fly, I was created to knock people out who don't evangelize.
All right, it's all you. This house has got your name on it.
I'm not ready yet.
What makes you think I'm ready, though?
It doesn't matter who rejects us because we're always accepted by Christ.
God loves you. Get off the floor and go door to door.
Can we talk to you for a minute?
I'm a lover, not a fighter, baby. Sometimes I'll blow you up, but it's because I love you.
Yeah, but just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I need to be out sharing my faith. I mean,
Don't you run from me! You can't escape my grasp. D3 will throw you in the trash.
Hey, I can't go to the outreach today. I just got some more important things I gotta do. Hey man, give me a break. I went to church on Sunday. I gotta go.
Selfishness. The world needs a message. For God to love the world, He wants to communicate it through you. If you procrastinate, you will open up the gate to a beatdown. Give me that phone, boy.
When I see selfishness, it is my job to blow them up. That's what I do. I blow them up so that they can get their eyes off of self and look at Christ, the prize.
What's up, baby girl? Nah, I'm busy.
Oh, is your double cappuccino latte mocha with a twist? Not too hot, not too cold. Perfect for you.
But anyway, man, did you hear that talk from that guy the other night?
Oh, I know. Like we were supposed to be sharing our faith in like coffee shop.
Woo! You next! Pride comes before the fall. That's Old Testament. Old Testament, you know this.
Thanks for the coffee, Darren.
Hey, you're welcome. Have a nice day.
Your mama raised you better than this boy. Don't let me blow you up no more.
You see, I think it's fitting because when people have pride, that they're too prideful to share their faith, what I do is I knocks the pride out of them. When you least expect it, around the corner, perhaps even under your bed, I can be in a phone wire. I can be everywhere. And just know that I'm always watching, ready to lay the boom on you, baby. Booyah!
We call him the evangelism linebacker. Seems pretty appropriate during football season. Now, I just want a moment of transparency here. How many of you, and I hope you realize this guy's not really coming here, but if he were coming here to join your staff, how many of you would start praying to look for another church? You know, I get it. I really do. Can I be honest? I really feel like some of you maybe, possibly, I hope not, but possibly have said no thanks to this afternoon's workshop because, like one guy said, he says, I know what you're going to try and get me to do. You want me to get out on the street corner and pound my big King Jimmy Bible and just start yelling at people and tell them they're going to hell if they don't know Jesus. I said, that's what you think I've come here to do? I came here to help you increase the quantity and quality of your God conversations, not decrease them. Let's be honest, there's all kinds of ways that people attempt to go after this, and my concern is that some of you probably have bumped into stuff that's really turned you off and you're saying, if that's what Neil is talking about, if that's what you've come to talk about, no thanks. Talk to the hand because I'm not listening. And I get that. But my promise to you is no, we're going to talk about real, authentic ways to start conversations. And here's the crazy thing. People actually on the other side of the divide, they really want to have these conversations. They're just waiting for somebody who's safe enough and somebody who is respectful enough and somebody who's willing to maybe listen a little bit before they, dump truck them with everything they know about Christianity. I find that people are more than willing to have these conversations. Well, the $1,000,000 question that I'm often asked as I travel around the world, and there's actually two of them. Maybe it's the same question that you have this morning. Here are the two questions I'm often asked. All right, Doug, all right. How do I do this? How do I bring God into my conversations without it feeling awkward or coming across like I'm a marketing rep for Jesus? I think that's a fair question. Or maybe your question is more like this. How do I naturally transition from talking about everyday things to sharing the good news of the gospel? This afternoon, we're going to be going after that in terms of answering those two questions. And I think hopefully here yet before we're done this morning, I'm also going to be, pushing into those questions a little bit to provide some answers to that. I think there's another question I want to ask you this morning is, how do we get out of this box? Because here's my big thought for you. One of the reasons why we're not having maybe as many God conversations as we used to is a lot of us who are older, we've grown up in a Christian culture. And you guys still probably, I think feel more of that here in Dallas. But boy, you go to Oregon, you go to New England, you go to places that are either post-Christian, or some people would say, no, Doug, these places aren't post-Christians. These places are pre-Christian. They don't even have anybody they know that's a Christian. And when I go onto college campuses and I ask college students all the time, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word Christian? Now, for some who are older, you grew up in loving, kind, gracious, good, faithful, all the good terms. But today, for a lot of people in our culture, this is what I'm hearing all the time. Judgmental, narrow-minded, holier than thou, anti-intellectual, condescending, homophobic, hypocritical, intolerant. Neil, by the way, just thank you for inviting me in to speak to such a group of people. Now, I know you didn't come here this morning, and I know you don't think of yourself of being that way, but here's a big thought for you this morning. People's perception is their reality. And if this is their perception, and think about it this way, if you were somebody on the other side, somebody outside the faith, would you want to talk to somebody like that? Somebody who's judgmental, narrow-minded, holier than thou, anti-intellectual, condescending, homophobic, hypocritical, and intolerant. Would you feel safe having a conversation like that? So one of the challenges we all face is that we're going to increase the quantity and quality of our God conversations. We've got to get out of that box. Colossians 4:5 says this, be wise in the way you act towards those who are outside the Christian faith. Make the most of your opportunities. How would we do that on our day-to-day route? Now, I just recently snapped this picture. Somebody had it in their yard, and I thought, wow, this kind of sums it up, doesn't it? No soliciting. We are too broke to buy anything. And we know who we are voting for. We have found Jesus. Seriously, unless you are selling Thin Mints, please go away. I'm like, wow. If we're going to be wise towards outsiders, let's realize that for a lot of people, that actually is pretty true, isn't it? And if it is, this is worth jotting down this morning, I think. Today, we have got to learn to find the back door into people's hearts. Why? Because the front door is heavily guarded. And if you're hoping to start a conversation with a front door, like walking up to somebody and say, hey, could I talk to you about Jesus? Hey, are you saved? Hey, would you like to come to church Sunday? I think a lot of you maybe intuitively know that's probably not where you want to start the conversation. Because if people are thinking like this person is like, we've already found Jesus, you're selling something, I feel like you're trying to sell Jesus. No thanks, I'm not interested. And the conversation's over before it even starts. Well, I probably picked the wrong Sunday to use this illustration. Maybe I picked the right Sunday because God wanted to humble me, and, the Buckeyes lost by 1 point last night to Oregon. It's a great day for college football. A lot of great games yesterday. But what I've noticed when I go to a football game, and I'm going to use a football analogy since we're in football season, and I hope that you get it, because I think there's a lot of parallels between having conversations and the sport of football. Give me a chance to convince you of that. First big belief I have is that God conversations have to start where people are in relationship to God. Here's a biggie, not where we'd like them to be. In the sport of football, when the game starts, the captains come out, they flip a coin. One team wins and gets to choose whether they want to receive or kick the ball off. And the game doesn't actually start until the ball is kicked off and the other team receives it, and they got to start where they catch the ball in the field, not where they'd like the ball to be on the field. And I'm just saying, hey, that's true for conversations. It'd be nice if I could just walk up to anybody I meet and say, hey, would you like to know Jesus? And they'd say, sure. What do I have to do? I've only ever had, in my fishing all over the world in 42 different countries, I've only ever had 2 fish jump in the boat where they came to me and said, hey, man, I know you know Jesus. I want to know Jesus like you know Jesus. I've only ever had that happen twice. The rest of the time, anywhere in the world, I've had to go fishing. And I'm just thinking, if you live in the same world that I do, how many of you know somebody who's a long, long way away from God? They're way back at the other end zone. They're very resistant to the claims of Christianity. How many of you have somebody like that on your route? How do we start the conversations with them when they seem to have so much angst and anger towards the church? Or maybe you know people who are apathetic and they kind of say, hey, listen, if that's your thing, that's fine for you. Just don't push it onto me. Or maybe, Christmas is kind of around the corner. Maybe they show up here for a Christmas service. They're curious. Biggest mistake we as Christians make is we oversupply and we tend to kill the demand. We tend to biggie size our spiritual meal and we overwhelm people with too much information. Or how about if somebody were seeking and they wanted to know, hey, I want to get to know Jesus. Do you know how you help them cross the goal line of faith, so to speak? Now, I run into Christians all the time who feel like such failures in this work because they don't have any touchdown stories. And, it's fun to hear a touchdown story, and we tend to prop those up in the church. It's fun to have that story where, hey, I had a conversation and the ball moved all the way down the field and this person became a Christ follower. The reality is, those stories are more the exception than they are the norm. And what I would want you to know today, as I've talked to evangelists all over the world about this, that just like the sport of football, The good football teams are committed to what I call nudging the ball down the field, one first down at a time, moving the ball down the field to get themselves in the scoring position. So what if you and I could just embrace the idea that God wants to use us in what I call the nudging ministry, to help that person just take the next step in their journey towards the foot of the cross. Instead of feeling like so many people do, that there's so much pressure that I got to make all this happen in one big conversation. I mean, if you study the life of Jesus, I don't know how you can come to that inner conclusion. There are times when you look and you say, wow, that wasn't very much there in terms of what Jesus said to them. It's like, wow, really? That was it? Like, you didn't give them a big giant presentation, Jesus. I mean, how are they supposed to go from here to there with just the little information you gave them? And I think if you study the life of Jesus, you realize that no two conversations were the same. They were all unique as the people he was talking to. I want to end with a story that maybe might help tie up all the loose ends. You know, how do you start a conversation? How do you do it in a polarized culture? I mean, we're living in crazy times, aren't we? I mean, this election thing just, oh, wow, it just ramps people up, and the nasty, mean-spirited kinds of conversations. Pay attention to what's going on social media. I mean, people, both sides of the coin are going at it, and you know, that's part of the challenge we face if we're going to have conversations, is how do we do these conversations without stepping on some of the landmines that just blow up and create lots of division and divisiveness. Well, this story starts on an airplane as I was traveling to Canada to speak at one of the largest churches in Canada, 2,500 people. And I got on the plane early in the morning, and I had a row all to myself, Neil. That for me is special, because then I can spread out my books, my papers, my laptop, and a lot of times I will do this. I'll do a lot of my prep on the plane flight to my next speaking engagement, and I had a row all to myself, and I was like, God, thank you. You're so good. But right before they close the door, some lady's hustling down the jetway, and when you know, as she comes onto the plane, she's sitting right next to me, and I had to get all my stuff out of her way, and she sat down, and the word on the street, ladies, is that most of you need 25,000 words a day to feel, like it's a normal day for you. I'm convinced this lady was a flaming extrovert. She needed 40,000, and the day had just started. So as soon as she sat down, it was like, ba 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 ba, and I'm sitting there going, God, not now, not now. I don't have time to be in a conversation right now. I'm preparing tonight to speak to 2,500 people. So I reminded God what he already knew, which is kind of crazy, isn't it? Well, I've learned that if you wrestle with God, you might as well just tap out and get with his program, because there's always good things whenever we align ourselves, to God's kingdom and his program. So I closed my laptop, turned to the lady, and we started talking. And I soon found out she was a world traveler just like myself. I've been to 42 countries. She had been to 26. And it dawned on me, I'm wondering what takes her to all these countries. I know what takes me to all these countries. And so I asked her. I said, wow, that's awesome. You get to travel the world. Like, what do you do that takes you to all these places? And she immediately said, well, I'm the lead singer in a band. And I'm starting to think, wow, I wonder who this is. Is this Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac? I mean, I don't recognize her, but I'm thinking, she must be a big deal. And as we started talking, there's a big idea I have for you, and it certainly has been helpful to me. And that is, the secret of being interesting in a conversation is to be interested in someone else. And so I, started genuinely demonstrating interest in her world. And I did that by asking a question. And I think if people on your route are not ready for the answers you'd like to share with them, maybe you'd be wiser to start with questions instead. So I did. I asked her this question. I said, like, of all the gigs you've done all over the world, like, what was your most exciting gig? And she said, oh, that's really easy. And she blew me away with her answer. She said, I once did a gig where, and this is her, where I came on the stage playing a wireless saxophone while I rode on the back of a camel while my band played in front of the pyramids. And I'm like, wow, this lady rocks. I mean, this is awesome. And I said, well, if that's your most exciting gig, I mean, you probably got a number 2 that's pretty close. And I mean, she brought it right home here to Texas. She said, yes. She said, I once played for President Bush when he was in the White House. And I was in the White House, and I did my band and I did a concert for him. And I'm thinking, I'm probably the local village idiot. I gotta know who this is. I mean, she is definitely big time. And I follow up my question by saying, well, what was that like for you? Being in the White House like that? And she said, oh, let me tell you something. I'll never do that again. And I was shocked. I mean, I was dumbfounded. I'm like, most performers would love to have more, opportunities to do concerts at the White House. So I said, what gives? Like, you really got me, scratching my head here. I'm thinking the most performers would want to do that. And she said, well, and here's the context. It's the same context we're living in right now. It was a month before the election. It was Obama's second term. He's coming up for re-election. And when you're in a battleground state like Ohio was at that point in time, you're getting robocalls from Arnold Schwarzenegger. You're getting robocalls from, whoever. And they're all trying to convince you to change your mind and vote for their candidate. And it gets very mean-spirited and whatnot. And she said, this is what she said. She said, I never, and she was so passionate about it, she says, I would never use my talents again to advance somebody's political cause. I said, I get that. She goes, I'm tired of the mean-spiritedness. I'm tired of people demonizing one another, no matter which side you're on. I just hate the whole scene. And maybe some of you this morning are sitting here feeling the same way. Like, the conversations going on in our culture, just some really brutal stuff. And just casually, I dropped a pin. Here was the pin I dropped that day. I said, I absolutely get you, and I feel the same way. And, the same thing seems to happen with the topic of religion. I just dropped it. I had no idea. I'm just kind of like chumming the waters, as fishermen do, to kind of see if the fish are nibbling. She hit that thing like a barracuda. She was on that so fast, she said, oh, tell me about it. I said, it sounds like you've had some bad experiences with people who are religious when it comes to conversations. She goes, oh my gosh, yeah. And I said, well, tell me your story. What happened? She said, well, my family and I are Jewish, and we grew up in the poorest neighborhood. We were the poorest Jews in the neighborhood, and so we were the butt of everyone's jokes. And here's what she said next. Think about how you'd respond if you were sitting next to her. She said, I absolutely hate religion. Now, how do you have a conversation when someone basically shutting the door in your face and saying, if you go here today, I'm going to cut your head off because I hate religion? And that's kind of where we find ourselves, isn't it? That's where we find ourselves. And I'm here to tell you that Actually, I love being in environments like that because people who are passionate actually want to talk about what they believe, but we just got to have a conversation in a different way that doesn't feed into the narrative they already have, the perceptions they already have about religious people. And here's how I did that on that particular day. I said, I totally, again, I identify with her. I said, I get where you're coming from. And I said, so I've got one more question, and it speaks to what you just said. And if you don't want to go here, that's fine. So the first thing I did was showed respect to her. I said, hey, I'm going to ask you a question about religion. You've already told me you hated it, and I am listening, but I am wondering something. I'm curious about something. And I think what we need to do is release our curiosity, not our judgment, not our belief system, but we need to release our curiosity. And I did that by saying, I'm wondering if you've ever had an experience that you'd call spiritual in nature. She goes, you know, I have. She goes, when I was 12 years old, my parents were going through a divorce. And I was stuck in the middle. They were both trying to pull me their way and try to convince me they were the ones that were right. And as a 12-year-old girl, I really didn't see any good future for my life, so I decided to take my life by committing suicide. And I'm like, whoa, we are doing a deep dive here. I mean, this is going, like, this is 35,000 feet. Woo! And I said, wow. I said, what happened? And she said, well, one day I decided, my parents had left the house. I was going to go out to a park, and I was going to overdose on my mom's prescription pills. And I decided before I did that, I should write them a note and explain to them why I was taking my life. So she made her way out to this park, and she seemed to describe it as a place where it was remote and nobody could see her. And as she was writing her note and her focus was downward, some lady, older lady, comes up to her and just like out of the blue tells her, you don't want to do this. And it shocked her, like, how would you know what I'm going to do today? And it seemed like this lady was like reading her mail, and it kind of spooked her. And then the lady said, someday your life is going to bring joy to lots of people. And she totally caught her off guard, and it gave her hope for the future. And as she was thinking about this incredible conversation that this lady was having with her, she looked up and the lady was gone. I said, whoa. I said, have you ever had any other No, keep in mind, my big belief is that if God loves people, he is constantly reaching out to them, seeking them, trying to draw them to himself. But sometimes people don't recognize that it's God who's behind it all. And so this is what it means to join the conversation God's already having with someone. And so I said, well, have you had any other experiences that you call spiritual in nature? And she right away whipped off one when she was 21, when she almost perished in a car accident, and the stories that were behind that. And as she started sharing the story, you get a bang out of this, Neil. I started to chuckle a little bit, and she says, why are you laughing? And I said, well, I mean, you told me you hate religion, and I'm sitting here listening to you describe two stories. You got to understand where I'm coming from. I believe there's a God who loves you. And you know, I'm not saying I know this for sure, but is it possible that the lady who showed up that day could have been an angel sent by God to keep you from doing something that he didn't want you to do? And that's why you never saw her before, you never saw her after, and you wondered where she came from and how she knew what you were going to do. I said, I don't know, it's possible, isn't it? And she goes, oh my gosh. She smacked herself right in the head and she said, I've never thought about it that way before. And I said, you know, I know you've grown up Jewish, and so I'm wondering if you've ever studied the life of Jesus, because I actually think you and him have a lot in common. She goes, what would that be? I said, well, you said you hated religion. Jesus had his strongest words for people who were religious. And I said, he got a title that I think you're going to enjoy. It's called A Friend of Sinners. And I said, I would consider it my great privilege to be your tour guide through the New Testament. We have an hour left in the trip. And I'd just like to thumb through the New Testament, and we just kind of continue our conversation, and we can look at the life of Jesus and what he did that I think would cause you to see that Jesus is not about religion. He's about a relationship. And maybe he's the one who's been reaching out to you all along. And she goes, oh my gosh, you're getting me to rethink my whole life. We did an hour-long Bible study on the plane, and when we landed, she said this. She said, I want to thank you so much. I've never had a conversation like this. And then she said, I wish more people could have conversations like this. And I said, so do I. You know, Ecclesiastes says that God has planted eternity in the human heart. And I think we should actually, as Christians, expect that people who aren't coming to church actually want to have these conversations, but we have to do it with convicted civility. We have to do it in a way that is winsome, in a way that opens people up to the heart of Jesus. You know what happened that day on the plane? Some of you are wondering maybe where I come up with the title for the book. It's called God Space. This is what God Space is in a short Cliff Note version. If you were to read my book, you would find out how to create this kind of space. And that's what happened that day on the airplane. And I think what it did is it gave her a space for her to talk honestly about where she was and not be forced to go any further or any faster than, but she was curious. And all I did was kind of join the conversation. And I think God was all along. There were knock-knock moments, and I said to her, I said, have you ever thought that maybe God has been trying to get your attention through these things? And that maybe and what I'm wondering is, why are you dissing the God who is actually reaching out to you? And this was the clincher, Neil. I said, is it possible maybe you've been dissing the God who's been knocking on the door of your heart because you don't want to become like those religious people who hurt you? And that's where a lot of people are living today. Hey, Neil told me when I came I had to observe the Beatitudes if I were going to be invited to speak in the second service. And I said, well, I like all the Beatitudes, Neil. I mean, which one are you talking about? And he kind of caught me off guard. He said, blessed are the brief, for they will be asked back. So I'm going to need to land the plane here, but I hope you guys choose to come this afternoon and join us. We're going to have a great time as we talk about how to increase the quantity and quality of our God conversations. Right now, our worship band is going to take us back to the throne room where we get to talk and sing and express our joy to the one we've been talking about. Amen. Amen.